Hello everybody, welcome back. Hope you're enjoying the weekend wow. For those that don't know who I am, my name's Tracy Evans. I'm part of the All and Create design team, and for this video I'm showcasing stamp set Beetle 335, and I have to say I love these Beetles. I just think they're fab. And it's just something a little bit different for your stamp sets. And those Beetles would work really well if you've bought any of the flower images before or any of my previous releases, then they'd work really well. They'd work really well and combine really well together, because you can use the element as a whole or just use part of the image. So I've got my piece of card here, and it's 3.5 inches in width by 8 inches in length. So what I'm using is a Vintage Photo Distress Oxide re-inker. You need to give that a little shake because it's got a ball bearing at the bottom. So you just need to give that a shake. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the tiniest amount of the Vintage Photo Distress Oxide. And as you can see, I'm hoping you can see that on camera, it's quite a tiny amount, but it's very concentrated. And that's what I love about the Distress Oxide re-inkers. Just spritz that with water, and then I'm using a mixed media card that can take waters as well, and then you can just dab that onto your card. And then what you can do is you can spritz the ink a little bit more and allow that to run down the card, just to give you a nice simple backdrop. Nice and simple. And then you can tip off the excess, and we won't dry that. I've got one that I've done before. You can allow that to dry naturally, so we'll just put that out the way. You've still got some ink here, so you can dab more ink onto your card. So you can add more ink to your card, just like so. Just from that tiny amount of Distress Oxide re-inker. That's one advantage of the re-inkers. They are fantastic for just layering colour really quickly. I have got a couple that I've created before, so we'll actually bring those in. Just move my card stock out of the way. And what I've got is I've got the two backgrounds here. So as you can see, this is the darker element and this is the light one. So I can use either of those. So I think for this occasion we'll use this one, and I might use the other one in another demo. So I'm going to create with this one. And as you can see, you've got some lovely oxidization here as well. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to ink my stamp with VersaFine Clair. I'm using a VersaFine Clair ink, which has got a really good open time. And this tends to be my preferred ink for doing straightforward stamping. I like to use this ink because it's got a good open time and it's a little bit more forgiving. And if you're using stamps that have got quite a bit of fine detail, then the VersaFine Clair is a really good ink to use. So I'm just applying a good layer of ink. I never rush this process. I always make sure that I get a good layer of that ink. I think the card is relatively dry. We'll have to hope for that. Hope that it's relatively dry, because if you're stamping onto a wet surface, you need to allow that ink to sit on the card. So don't just plonk it on and then lift it up, because you're not going to get a clean, crisp image. You need to allow that ink to rest on the card. Sometimes we're in a little bit of a rush just to stamp that image, and then we wonder why we get frustrated because we haven't got a good, strong stamped image. Now, when you're using Distress Oxide inks, even when you dry those inks with the heat tool, there can still be moisture in that card, so just be aware of that, and that's why you allow the ink to sit. I'm using the All and Create acrylic blocks, so that means I can lift these acrylic blocks because they've got flexibility, which means that I can get that central area on my stamp. So I find these really easy to use with the stamps when they're combined with the stamps. It works quite well. And as you can see, I don't rush that process because there's quite a bit of detail on this stamp. Even though there's open areas, there's still quite a bit of detail. And look at that. I just love that. Even if you just wanted the card just like that, I just think it's fantastic. I just love it. I just love those little Beetles. I really love them. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stamp the same image onto a book page. So just let me tear my book page out. Let's move that out of the way. And I'm just using a vintage engineering book. So just tear that page out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to stamp the Beatles once again onto the vintage book page. I love vintage book pages. I just love the texture, the detail, the smell. Perhaps I'm a bit weird, but I do like the smell of vintage book pages as well. I do think I'm a little bit strange at times. So again, I'm just giving that a good inking. Now, when you're stamping onto book pages, you don't have to worry about blotting your image because the book page is quite absorbent, so it's not so much of a problem. Now, I don't want the whole image of the Beatles. I just want part of the images because I'm going to tear some of it out. And again, I will lift, and this time I'm not stamping onto a moist surface. I'm stamping onto an absorbent piece of paper, so everything should be okay. But I didn't ink this area very well because I only want part of the image. I don't want the total design. I just want part of it. So just lift that up. And as you can see, I've got a lovely, lovely image there. And if I just bring in the original one, and then if I just get a scrap of paper, just to blot that image, this one that's on the card. We need to blot that image because this ink has got a really good open time. So if you're not careful, you'll smudge. So really you should blot and dry. But I tend to blot with copier paper just to make sure that everything's okay and nice and dry. So what I'm going to do is just wipe that up. What I'm going to do is just tear this book page just so we've got part of the image. I don't want the total, I don't want all the bug, I just want parts of it, just so we can add some of that detail from the bugs but just on a book page. And then what I do is I tend to look at it. I don't want any straight edges, so just remove some of that so it isn't quite straight. And then I overlay the design, but that covers up too much. So what I do is I literally keep tearing until I'm happy with what I've got, because I just want it to have a hint of the book pages. So that is much better for me. That's more appealing because I can still see some of the detail underneath and some of that detail on the top as well. So we'll just add some adhesive to the book pages. Now you could use matte medium if you wanted to make it nice and easy, but for quickness I'm just going to use my PVA glue. Just move this so you can see that I'm just adhering that. Obviously everything is done a lot quicker for video purposes. You take a lot more time when you're at home just applying the adhesive, just to make sure you get good edge to edge adhesion. So then the hardest bit is lining it up, just making sure that you've got it perfectly lined up. That's the hardest bit of this project. Everything else, there's nothing too complicated. So there we go. Just make sure that's all lined up. Just look at your imagery and make sure everything is okay. I think that's fine. So I just love how tactile it makes it because you've got that book page and you've got the stamped image underneath. I really like that. So what I want to do now is add a spotlight. So I'm going to add a spotlight over my image like this. I just think that spotlight works really well. It just makes everything pop. And because we've got these white areas in the background, it brings that lightness, that brightness to your design. And that little beetle, sorry, I just love beetles. Maybe not so much when they're walking over my feet in the garden, but I do like them in artwork. There's just something about them. And it'd be great for a teenager as well, for somebody that really likes wildlife or, you know, sort of the great outdoors. So what I'm doing is I'm just adding that spotlight there. And what you could do is you could make this into a shaker. So you could add a piece of acetate below this one of these circles, and then you could add a shaker element. So you could make that into a shaker as well, just to make it something a little bit different. And what I've got here is I've got a little one of the Beatles, well, the actual big Beetle, and I've actually got him in vintage tones. And what I've done is I've stamped him And then I've just added clear embossing powder over the top. I just think he's fab. And he's got a little heart on the top as well. I just love him. So I'm now going to add that over the top like this. And what I'm going to do, excuse my arm, is I'm going to add some cotton thread. The cotton thread will just add another little touch of texture for me. I love textures and layers. You're probably used to me by now with all the textures and layers, but that's just something I love doing. So I mess with this, a bit like I'm messing with hair. So I then just add that, and I just add a little bit of glue below the threads, just so you can press some of those threads into the adhesive. So it just secures it. Just place that in there. It just adds a nice little layer of texture. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to add my little beetle on the top, like so. Oh, I just think he's fab. Do you like how he's a he? But I do think he's fab. So I've got the beetle there. And then what we can do is we can add a little bit more detail. So let's go for some calico. I love calico. Those people that follow me know that I love calico for adding an extra textural element. So I'm going to stamp the word beetle. There's lots of elements on this. There's like a little background element here that you can use on its own. So I love that piece as well. And you've got these bug, insect, little numbers. Just love them. These are the kind of stamps that really make me happy. They inspire me to create. That's just me. I mean, I know it's my own design, but they do inspire me to create when they've got all those layered elements. That's the kind of thing that makes me happy when I'm creating. So I'm just going to tear this a little bit so it's not quite so thick. So just tear that and then just make it a little bit shorter. And that's what I love about calico, because you get all these fibres. So just bring in the card and then place the beetle over the initial text, like so, just to give it an extra textural element. So just adhere that. Again, I'm just using my PVA. You could use Versacraft to stamp if you were using it, you know, you needed it for permanent basis. But because I'm just stamping on the calico for a card, then I'm just using my VersaFine Clair, which is absolutely fine. But just to prove, if you take the stamp off the block and we just look at these elements here, in itself you've also got some background element here. Let's just ink this up so you've got some like little equations and things. So you can ink that with the vintage photo, and then you can add some of that to the background. Just look at this little detail here, how that just adds a little detailed element. I just love things like that, and I love it when the stamps have got that element on there as well. There's just something about adding the little details. It makes me happy. So I'm just adding a couple of details, just some small details, nothing too much, nothing too over the top. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add some white splatters, which you must be used to by now. When you've seen a Tracy Evans card, you must be used to those white splatters. So just add some white splatters that just lifts the card. It just lifts the whole design. Just clean our area, just so we can bring in some black card, just so you can see what you end up with. And if you layer that onto black card and then layer that onto a white card, I love it. Nice simple card, but so effective with those layers, with all the layers that you get. These are the kind of cards that I just love. Simple, still effective, having lots of simple layers, but for me they draw the eye in and they're so eye-catching. So I will see you in a few moments. Bye.